The veil suppresses our premortal memories, but does not remove them. As a result, we can act upon these subconscious memories. The terror of planetary catastrophes has traumatized all mankind to one extent or another. The veil does provide one layer of defense against the trauma. Nevertheless, the veil cannot remove all remembrance of the catastrophes from the historical or geologic records. Therefore, there must be further mechanisms of suppression. We have discussed these mechanisms previously and will only say here that our planetary history has been obscured in the symbolism we call myth and delegitimized in the scientific dogma known as uniformitarianism. What we haven't discussed is man's propensity to act out the behaviors of his ancestors when events trigger the suppressed memories of cataclysm. For example, there is a well-documented fear of comets as signs of impending doom. Mankind's fear of comets is well attested in the historical record. Shakespeare referred to the common belief that comets portend the death of kings and princes, citing the example of the comet of Julius Caesar in the play of that name. The comet seen in 1066, assumed to be Halley's Comet, was believed to be a portent of the death of King Harold II. Harold reigned less than a year, dying in the Battle of Hastings. The comet of 1106 signaled the death of Henry IV, Emperor of Rome. "150 years later, a comet was seen for days in the sky. Its appearance, as it is told, coincided with Pope Urban IV falling sick, and its disappearance coincided with his death. Charlemagne, who saw the comet and understanding its significance, consulted with a philosopher named Ingard. They both concluded that its appearance threatened the emperor with some dire calamity. As late as the 20th century in China, the comet of 1910 contributed to the overthrow of the Chinese emperor in 1911. James Hudson, a missionary in China at the time, wrote that the Chinese believed the comet indicated that a great calamity would befall the nation. As the Chinese reaction to the comet of 1910 suggests, the fear of comets was more than a portent of the death of a king, emperor, pope, or dynasty. It was also an omen of fire, pestilence, and upheaval. Comets threatened national survival. When a great comet appeared in 1456 during the reign of Pope Calixtus IV, a member of the famous Borgia family, mathematicians declared that the star would bring pestilence, famine, and an unspecified calamity. The comet was attributed to the wrath of God and signified the end of the human race. Calixtus ordered prayers to avert the coming disaster and instead turned God's wrath upon the Turks instead. The English theologian, mathematician, and historian William Whiston believed that comets were responsible for past catastrophes. In 1736, he caused anxiety throughout London by predicting the end of the world due to a comet hitting Earth. The comet of 1910 caused more than unrest in China. It created what is known as the Great Comet Scare of 1910. Throughout the world, there was fear that the toxic gas, cyanogen, present in the tail would enter Earth's atmosphere, killing all life on the planet. Businessmen capitalized on the fear, selling gas masks, pills, and umbrellas. It is undeniable that there has been and still is a worldwide and long-enduring fear of comets. Mankind fears that a great comet will change the destiny of kingdoms and empires and indeed bring an end to the world. The question then is, why does man fear the comet? Man's fear of comets has been defined in the medical world as cometophobia. Cometophobia, as the name implies, is the fear of comets. Cometophobia joins a very long list of officially recognized phobias, including related phobias such as selenophobia, the fear of the moon, heliophobia, fear of the sun, siderophobia, fear of stars, meteorophobia, fear of meteors, and the general phobias of cosmic phobia, the fear of cosmic phenomena, and cosmophobia, the fear of outer space. By designating the fear as a phobia, the medical world has regulated the fear to the level and nature of all other phobias. Cometophobia is simply another variety of irrational and abnormal fear of something. It's not real or to be feared. How the medical profession came to the conclusion that the fear of comets is irrational and abnormal remains unexplained. One look at history can only lead to the conclusion that when a great comet appears, the normal reaction worldwide is one of fear and dread. Fear is the norm. Proposed causes for cometophobia range from the silly, as this one-siding sci-fi or fantasy programs or books, which can hardly account for the fear of comets in the Middle Ages, to unspecified emotional trauma and unresolved conflict experienced in childhood. Apparently, we are to believe a person with cometophobia has had an unresolved emotional conflict or trauma with a comet in childhood. Due to the diagnosis of the fear of comets as a garden variety phobia, its symptoms are believed to be the same as other phobias, the difference being the fear is triggered by seeing a comet. It is doubtful that any medical practitioner has observed a patient during an actual appearance and observation of the comet. Besides, the behavior and symptoms described by the historical records tell a very different story. There have been no mention of dizziness, lightheadedness, or headaches. Instead, there is mass panic, civil upheaval, sitting indoors for days without drinking water, calling for national days of prayer, and so forth. The symptoms posited by the medical establishment have more to do with symptoms observed in the more common phobias than in the fear of comets as recorded in the history books. Proposed treatments for cometophobia follow the same line. Treat the fear of comets as a simple phobia. One can only wonder, if a truly great comet appeared in the future, whether there will be enough doctors and therapists to address the needs of the masses of people throughout the world affected by cometophobia. Or, from the historical perspective, if these treatments and strategies had been available in the past, would the Chinese populace have been calmed enough that the Chinese Empire would still be with us today? The truth is that the fear of comets runs much deeper and is endemic to the human race. There are no simple treatments or cures. The diagnosis of fear of comets as a phobia, cometophobia, may seem reasonable given the origin and nature of other phobias. However, If the phobia of comets is the result of a previous trauma or unresolved conflict, most likely in childhood, then what can the trauma or emotional conflict possibly be? Furthermore, how can the clear historical evidence of nations and dynasties rising and falling at the appearance of great comets be ascribed to individual trauma or inner conflict? Wouldn't the collective fear of comets be the result of collective trauma? Certainly, this must be so. What is also left unresolved are the specific ideas associated with the appearance of comets. How does childhood trauma and unresolved conflict explain the universal association of comets with the death of kings and the end of dynasties, or with plague, famine, and the end of the world? The overwhelming fear of comets, as demonstrated throughout history, can only be engendered before the appearance of the comets themselves. That is, like all phobias, trauma must precede the fear. The question is then, what was the event or events that traumatized the entire world and continues to traumatize mankind? Before there were comets as we know them today, there was a great comet, the mother of comets, the planet Venus. David Talbot explains.
The greatest surprise for science will lie in the global evidence that Venus formerly roamed the sky as a comet, in the language of ancient myths and symbols, the mother of all comets.
It was Immanuel Velikovsky who brought the cometary and catastrophic history of Venus to the attention of the world.
According to Velikovsky, the history of the comet Venus inspired one of the most powerful themes of ancient myth and ritual, a collective memory of catastrophe, global upheaval, earth-shaking battles in the sky, decimation of nations on Earth, an extended period of darkness, and the end of one world age and the birth of another.
We will not make the case for the cometary Venus here, as it is available elsewhere. Suffice it to say, the tradition was worldwide and induced awe and terror.
That chroniclers the world over did indeed describe Venus as a comet, not the planet that we observe on a predictable path today, from Egypt and Mesopotamia to northern Europe and Africa, from the Mediterranean to the South Pacific, from China to the Americas. The sky worshippers remembered the comet Venus with awe and terror.
It was the universal dread stemming from the activities of the ancient Venus, the mother of all comets, that caused mankind's fear of comets.
The universal fears of comets trace to the symbolic mother of all comets, without which the global accord could never have arisen in the first place.
Venus's position in the polar configuration also gave rise to the archetypes now assigned to ordinary comets.
It's only to be expected that the great comet archetype would extend to the perceived fates of kings and kingdoms, since the comet meant the death of the prototypical king, the primeval sun, the mythic father of kings. That was when darkness overtook the earth and the god's luminous heart or soul rose in the sky. Then the gods went to war, and one world age passed into another. So of course kings feared nothing more than the wispy first appearance of a comet. The reason for the superstition has never been adequately recognized or explained. The myths and symbols of comets trace directly to the story of the great comet, the prototype that gave the later symbols their range of meaning. Unpredictable comets wandering into view in later times could only produce more echoes of the archetypal theme, the mother of all comets.
The comet Venus and the catastrophic havoc it wreaked upon Earth, including global upheaval and the end of civilizations, were witnessed on Earth and in heaven. Every soul who lived during the time of the mother of the comets, whether in mortality or in the spirit world, watched in dread, sharing each other's emotional trauma. When men see a comet in the heavens, the fear and dread of the original comet is reborn. Our consciousness, our spirit, our mind have never forgotten the events or the horror of the events. This is the origin of mankind's fear of comets. It is also the origin of mankind's fear of eclipses. It was the extended period of darkness caused by the comet of Venus that is replicated by solar eclipses when the world again becomes dark, if only for a matter of minutes. The fear of comets and eclipses and other such phenomena is still embedded in our collective subconscious, waiting to be activated by the appearance of another great comet. Now we know from prophecy that there will be another comet, signaling the onset of the apocalypse. In fact, there will be at least 3 planetary comets, Mars, Venus, and Saturn, returning to the vicinity of Earth to once again form the sign of the Son of Man. When the world sees the sign, they will mourn. As in the past, the cometary planets will bring disaster to the Earth. Men's hearts will fail them from fear. The fear, unlike the appearance of comets in the Middle Ages, will be fully justified. And like the cometary catastrophes of the past, the returning comets will decimate the nations and give birth to a new world. Man not only subconsciously remembers the disasters associated with the cometary Venus throughout history, but he also remembers the proceedings of the pre-mortal council. It was at this council where these catastrophes were proposed and approved, including the Great Apocalypse. Man's subconscious knows that sometime in the future, planetary comets will return to Earth and wreak havoc on the Earth and its inhabitants. What we have learned from the fear of comets, eclipses, and other celestial phenomena is that man does act upon these memories, though he remembers them only subconsciously. The veil suppresses man's memory of the pre-mortal council but does not inhibit man from acting upon these memories. The veil, of course, is a symbol. The Lord did not place the piece of cloth over our memories or in front of God in the spirit world to separate or conceal. And like all gospel symbolism, the veil is based upon a planetary archetype. The question then is, what is the planetary archetype of the veil? But first we must explore the usage of veil symbolism throughout the scriptural record. We first encounter the veil when Rebekah saw Isaac. Upon seeing her future husband, she took a veil and covered herself. The significant point here is that unlike the modern veil, the veil Rebekah used covered her entire body and not just her face. When Tamar seduced her father-in-law Judah, she first put off her widow's garments and covered herself with the veil, wrapping herself in it, including her face. After speaking with the Lord on Mount Sinai, Moses' face shone, so much so that the Israelites were afraid. To allay their fears, Moses put a veil over his face. In contrast to the full-body veils worn by Rebekah and Tamar, Moses' veil was a temporary contrivance to a particular situation. The veil only needed to cover his face to quell the fears of Israel. After the building of the tabernacle, the term veil primarily referred to the curtain placed between the holy place and the most holy place. We will address this veil later. Full-bodied veils like those of Rebecca and Tamar were quite common of the time and are still present in the modern world. This bronze statuette of a veiled and masked dancer fits the description of Tamar's veil, which covered her entire body and was wrapped around. This statue of Hera Campana, a Roman copy of the Hellenistic original, shows the goddess wearing a full-length veil. The veil does not cover the face, though it could be used for that purpose. It flows down from the crown of her head, drapes over her shoulders, and extends down to her feet. The marble statue of Vibia Sabina, wife of Roman Emperor Hadrian, shows her wearing a full-length veil wrapped around her body like that of Hera Campana. The Indian sari dates back to the Indus Valley civilization, approximately the 2nd to 3rd millennium BC. It consists of draped material varying from 5 to 9 yards in length and 2 to 4 feet in width. While the modern sari is typically wrapped around the waist, originally it had a veil worn over the shoulder or head. The loose end of a sari can be pulled over the head and face to form a gungat. Coptic women historically covered their head and face in public and in the presence of men. This practice included a head cover and a burqa, a cloth covering the lower nose and mouth. In this picture, the burqa extends from the nose to the feet. A white veil signified an unmarried woman, and black signified a married woman. The chador, another full-length covering garment, is found in predominantly Persian or Iranian countries, but also in India and Pakistan. The chador is a semicircle of fabric placed over a woman's head who holds it closed and surrounding her face. This form of veil dates to the 5th or 6th century BC. Perhaps the most well-known full-body veil is the Islamic burqa. The burqa covers the entire body and face. A mesh screen allows the wearer to see in front of her. The full-length veiling of women, sometimes including the face, dates back to pre-Islamic times, as this 1st century relief from the Temple of Baal in Palmyra, Syria, attests. A form of the burqa is worn in Central Asia called the faranja. It is a traditional robe for women and girls that covers the head and body. Not all veils referring to face and head coverings extend to the feet. Some simply cover the head and face, while others extend over the shoulders and to the midriff. The Turkish yasmak was 2 parts, one to veil the face under the nose, and the other tied across the forehead and draping the head. The Muslim niqab has 2 styles. The half niqab is worn around the face, leaving the eyes and part of the forehead visible. The full niqab covers the entire face, leaving an opening for the eyes. Another veil worn by Muslim women is the hijab. The hijab generally covers the head and chest. The medieval Christian wimple encircled the head and face of women and was draped on the shoulder. The wimple was worn both by married women and by nuns. Nuns today who wear a traditional habit continue to wear the wimple. The list of variations of head coverings, including those that extend to the feet and cover the body, are near endless and continue to the modern day in modified forms. The veil is not restricted to women. Men too have worn veils, including head, face, and body coverings. These are simply symbolic counterparts to the female veil. The visor of military armor is also a masculine form of veil, covering the entire head and face, except for a slit or holes for the eyes. Veils, head coverings, and body wraps clearly follow the archetypes of the polar configuration. To begin with, we know that the archetype of the heaven man, male and female, was derived from the Axis Mundi as torso, the planets of Venus and Mars as the heads, with the crescent as outstretched arms. The Axis Mundi was often opaque, but was sometimes translucent and looked like it draped the planet Mars. It looked like a veil or curtain. From a perspective of an earthbound observer, the top of the Axis Mundi occluded the bottom portion of Saturn's sphere, the chin of the face. It was also positioned below the eye of heaven, Venus. This explains the Coptic veil, which extends from below the eyes down to the feet. The Axis Mundi was a pair of Birkeland currents, which twisted around each other. This gave the appearance of an ice cream cone, or wrapped fabric. This is the common motif of wrapping oneself in the veil, as did Tamar. Veils and scarves covered the head while keeping the face open, like the wimple, gargush, and coquelin. This pattern is modeled after the primeval enclosure surrounding the nested planets, Mars and Venus. Head coverings were also wrapped around the neck and over the shoulders. This is likely due to Venus's encircling tail called the Serpent of Creation. The combination of enclosure and pillar gave rise to the covered shoulder or full body veil, such as the burqa and hooded cowl. It is this archetype that served for the veil imposed upon each of us. Only a full-body veil can properly symbolize the complete envelopment of our consciousness, its field effects, and its memory. Or, as the scriptures put it, being within the veil. The scriptures speak of another kind of veil, the veil of the tabernacle and, later, the temple. This veil did not enclose, but separated the most holy place, or Holy of Holies, from the rest of the tabernacle. Significantly, the veil had cherubim, which harkened back to the cherubim, placed as a barrier between the telestial world and the terrestrial and celestial worlds. Or, from a different perspective, separated man from God. The veil in modern LDS temples are white and separate the terrestrial room from the celestial room, or man from the presence of God. The veil of the tabernacle and temple is a barrier that separates while not enclosing. It separates and hides the sacred space of the Holy of Holies, or the celestial room, from the lower realms. Like the veil that encloses the body, the barrier veil is based upon the planetary archetypes. In fact, the archetype is the same. In both cases, it is the world mountain that serves to enclose or separate. Isaiah hinted at this when he associated the mountain of the Lord, the world mountain or Axis Mundi, with the veil as a covering over all people. Enoch indirectly referred to the Axis Mundi as a veil of darkness over the whole face of the earth. Anciently, not only was the Axis Mundi a mountain, but also a chain or ladder. He later referred to this veil of darkness covering the earth and the heavens being darkened in the latter days. That is, the holy mountain enshrouded not only the earth, but the heavens above the earth. In our time, the Lord told Joseph Smith at a conference of the church in 1831 that the veil of darkness, referring to the universal barrier veil, prevented the members from seeing him, even though he was in their midst. And when he comes again, he will rend the veil for all to see him. He was more explicit on this event in a later revelation. This veil of darkness covers his heavenly tabernacle and hides the earth. He shall take off the veil, and all mankind shall see him in heaven together. The barrier veil was also called a curtain. The terrestrial form of the tabernacle of Moses had curtains with cherubim, an obvious connection to the veil with cherubim. When David proposed to Nathan the prophet that a permanent temple be constructed, his rationale was that the Ark of God was enclosed with curtains, while he, as king, lived in a house of cedar. David, as he expressed in Psalm 104, knew that the terrestrial curtain was modeled after the heavenly curtain. He also compares the curtain of heaven to a garment in which God is clothed. This garment or curtain is composed of light, honor, and majesty. Isaiah also described God as stretching out the heavens as a curtain or spreading out them as a tent. The veil is not only a curtain, but a tent as well. Isaiah made this clear in a later prophecy. The veil or curtain of heaven became the tent of heaven, which is the origin of the metaphor of Zion as a tent and its subdivisions as stakes of that tent. Zion, after all, was originally in the heavens. Before David and Isaiah, and before Moses and the building of the tabernacle, Enoch knew of the stretched out heavenly curtains. That is, as all things in the gospel, the heavenly archetype preceded the earthly replica. In our dispensation, the Lord explicitly called this curtain the curtain of heaven. He then said it was to be unfolded as a scroll is unfolded, revealing the face of the Lord. Now, we have addressed the heavenly scroll in previous videos. The scroll was the Axis Mundi, situated between two knob-like planets, Earth and Mars. But what does it mean that the veil of heaven covered the earth in darkness? How did it darken the heavens and cover the heavenly tabernacle? How did this curtain stretch out? How did it look like a tent? What were the stakes of the tent of Zion? The veil or curtain of heaven, the Axis Mundi, appeared to be draped over Mars. At times it had a pleated and translucent appearance. The veil or curtain extended from Mars and the sacred enclosure down to the earth. As the Axis Mundi formed, it first looked like a peg. This was the stake and cord of the tent of Zion. As the Axis Mundi developed, it extended downward and outward. God stretched forth the curtain of heaven or enlarged the tent of Zion. Ancient tent-like habitations were constructed worldwide in the imitation of the heavenly tent. Often, poles extended from the tent, representing the streamers extending from Venus. The curtain of heaven was fully stretched out at its base near Earth. It likely covered most of the northern hemisphere, giving rise to the symbol of the earth being covered by a veil of darkness.